What if I told you that a 3-digit number you probably didn't even know existed until your 20s now controls more aspects of your life than your social security number, your driver's license, or even your passport? What if this number determines not just whether you can buy a house, but where you can live, what job you can get, how much you pay for insurance, and even whether you can get a cell phone plan? Picture this: two identical twins, both 28 years old, both making $60,000 a year, both with the same education and work history. Twin A has a credit score of 750. Twin B has a score of 620. Here's what happens to their lives. Twin A gets approved for a $300,000 mortgage at 3.5% interest. Their monthly payment is $1,347. Twin B gets approved for the same loan at 5.8% interest. Their monthly payment is $1,762. Over 30 years, Twin B will pay $149,000 more for the exact same house. That's nearly 3 years of their entire gross salary. But it doesn't stop there. Twin A gets approved for the apartment they wanted, while Twin B gets rejected. Twin A gets hired for the management position, while Twin B gets passed over because the employer runs credit checks. Twin A pays $800 a year for car insurance, while Twin B pays $1,400 for identical coverage. Twin A gets the premium credit card with travel rewards, while Twin B gets stuck with a secured card that charges annual fees. The same person, living two completely different lives, all because of a number that most people don't understand and can't directly control. Here's what should terrify you. This system is barely 30 years old. Your grandparents bought houses, got jobs, and lived full lives without anyone ever calculating their creditworthiness using a secret algorithm. The FICO score was invented in 1989. Before that, lending decisions were made by humans who knew their communities, understood individual circumstances, and made judgments based on character and capability. But here's the question that should keep you awake at night. What if this isn't a bug in the system? What if it's a feature? What if the credit score system wasn't designed to help you build wealth, but to ensure you never escape the cycle of debt that keeps the financial system profitable? Today we're going to explore how a number that didn't exist for most of human history now controls your life in ways that would make George Orwell's Ministry of Truth jealous. We'll uncover why the system works exactly as intended, how it's expanded far beyond lending into total life control, and most importantly, how recognizing this manipulation is the first step toward breaking free from it. To understand how we got here, we need to travel back to a time that now seems like ancient history. 1988. Ronald Reagan was president, the Berlin Wall was still standing. Wall still stood, and most people had never heard of the internet. It was also the last year that Americans could live their entire adult lives without a credit score determining their fate. In 1989, Fair Isaac Corporation launched what would become known as the FICO score. They sold it as a revolutionary advancement in lending fairness, a way to remove human bias and subjective judgment from financial decisions. Banks embraced it enthusiastically, but not for the reasons they claimed publicly. Before credit scores, lending was relationship-based. You walked into your local bank, spoke with a loan officer who knew your family, your work history, and your character. They made decisions based on human judgment, taking into account factors that no algorithm could capture: your dedication to your children's education, your volunteer work in the community, your recovery from a medical bankruptcy, your commitment to a struggling business. This system wasn't perfect. It could be discriminatory, inconsistent, and sometimes unfair. But it was also human. It recognized that financial behavior is complex, that circumstances change, and that people are more than the sum of their past mistakes. The credit score promised to fix these problems by removing human judgment entirely. Decisions would be objective, based purely on mathematical analysis of payment history, debt levels, and credit utilization. It sounded fair, scientific, and modern. But here's what they didn't tell you. Banks didn't adopt credit scores to make lending more fair. They adopted them to make lending more profitable. Think about it from a bank's perspective. Under the old system, Loan officers had to spend time getting to know borrowers, understanding their situations, and making complex judgments. This was expensive and time-consuming. Worse, from the bank's perspective, loan officers occasionally approved borrowers who algorithms would have rejected, cutting into potential profits. The credit score solved all these problems. It automated lending decisions, eliminated the cost of human underwriters, and most importantly, it created a new form of borrower control that banks had never possessed before. Consider what actually happened when FICO scores became standard. Did lending become more accessible? Did more people get approved for loans? Quite the opposite. The percentage of mortgage applications that got approved actually decreased after credit scoring became widespread. But here's the crucial insight. The loans that were approved became more profitable for banks. The algorithm wasn't designed to maximize successful lending. It was designed to maximize profitable lending. There's a crucial difference. Under the relationship-based system, a bank might approve a loan for someone going through temporary financial difficulty because they knew the person's character and believed in their ability to recover. Under the algorithmic system, that same person gets rejected automatically, no matter what their actual prospects might be. But the most insidious aspect of the credit score system wasn't what it prevented, but what it created, a new form of behavioral control disguised as financial responsibility. Dr. Martha Poon, a sociologist who has studied credit scoring extensively, discovered something remarkable in the archives of Fair Isaac Corporation. The early developers of the FICO score weren't just trying to predict who would repay loans. They were trying to predict who would be profitable customers for banks. The difference is crucial. A profitable customer isn't necessarily someone who pays off their debts quickly. In fact, from a bank's perspective, the most profitable customer is someone who carries a balance, makes payments reliably, but never quite pays off their debt entirely. Someone who lives in what the industry calls the sweet spot of financial stress. The credit score was designed to identify and reward exactly this behavior. It's not a coincidence that paying off your credit cards completely can temporarily hurt your credit score, or that closing unused credit accounts can damage your rating. These aren't flaws in the system. They're features designed to keep you in profitable relationships with lenders. Joseph Stiglitz, Nobel Prize-winning economist, observed that credit scoring represents something unprecedented in human history. A system where your access to future opportunities is determined not by your current capabilities or even your past performance, but by your value as an ongoing profit center for financial institutions. When you really understand this, the entire system starts to look different. The credit score isn't measuring your trustworthiness or your financial responsibility. It's measuring your profitability to the financial system. And once you see it that way, all the seemingly irrational rules start to make perfect sense. There's something uniquely powerful about reducing human beings to numbers. Psychologists have long understood that when people are assigned numerical ratings, they become obsessed with improving those numbers, often at the expense of their actual well-being. The credit score taps into this psychology with surgical precision. It takes something as complex and personal as your financial life and reduces it to a single number between 300 and 850. This creates what behavioral economists call metric fixation. The tendency to focus on improving the metric rather than improving the underlying reality the metric is supposed to measure. Think about how you feel when someone mentions credit scores. Do you immediately think about your number? Do you feel pride, anxiety, or shame based on where that number stands? If so, you're experiencing exactly what the system was designed to create: emotional attachment to a number that has no inherent meaning. Dr. Shoshana Zuboff, author of The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, argues that credit scores represent one of the earliest examples of what she calls behavioral modification through numerical feedback. The system doesn't just measure your behavior, it actively shapes it by creating psychological pressure to conform to behaviors that benefit financial institutions. Here's how it works. The credit score creates anxiety about your number, then provides specific behaviors that will improve it. Pay your bills on time. Keep your credit utilization below 30%. Don't close old accounts. Don't apply for too much new credit. Maintain a mix of different types of credit. Notice something about these behaviors? They're not designed to help you build wealth or achieve financial independence. In fact, many of them actively prevent wealth building. Keeping credit accounts open that you don't need exposes you to potential fraud and overspending. Maintaining a credit mix encourages you to take on different types of debt you might not otherwise need. Keeping your credit utilization below 30% means maintaining a permanent balance on your credit cards instead of paying them off completely. But the psychological pressure to improve your score is so strong that millions of people follow these rules religiously, even when they know the rules don't serve their actual financial interests. Research by Duke University's Behavioral Economics Lab found something disturbing. People who check their credit scores frequently make worse financial decisions than those who ignore them entirely. The constant monitoring creates what psychologists call score anxiety, a state where improving the number becomes more important than improving actual financial health. Consider this common scenario. You have $2,000 in credit card debt and $2,000 in savings. Financial logic says you should pay off the debt immediately, saving yourself hundreds of dollars in interest. But credit score logic says you should keep the debt to maintain your credit utilization ratio and payment history. Millions of people choose credit score optimization over wealth building, literally paying interest on money they already have because they're afraid of hurting their number. This isn't accidental. The credit score system was designed to create exactly this kind of irrational behavior. When people prioritize their credit score over their actual financial well-being, they become more profitable customers for lenders. The gamification aspect makes it even more insidious. Credit monitoring apps send you notifications when your score changes, celebrating increases and warning about decreases. They've turned debt management into a video game, where the goal isn't to minimize your debt, but to maximize your score. Dr. Nir Eyal, who studies behavioral design, points out that the credit score system uses the same psychological techniques as social media platforms and gambling apps: variable rewards, social comparison, and fear of missing out. You never know exactly how your actions will affect your score, creating the same addictive uncertainty that keeps people checking their phones obsessively. But perhaps the most damaging psychological effect is learned helplessness. When people see their credit score as the ultimate measure of their financial worth, they often stop looking for alternatives. They accept high interest rates because that's what my score qualifies for. They avoid starting businesses because I need to protect my credit. They stay in jobs they hate because I can't risk missing payments. The credit score system has successfully convinced millions of people that their 3-digit number is more important than their actual dreams, goals, and financial possibilities. It's created a generation of people who optimize for the metric instead of optimizing for their lives. What's most troubling is how this psychological control extends beyond individual behavior. When everyone in a society is focused on maintaining their credit scores, it creates a collective mindset that accepts debt as normal and necessary. It makes people more compliant, more risk-averse, and more dependent on the financial system. The ancient Greeks had a word for this: doulos. Not quite slavery, but a form of economic bondage where people remain technically free while being controlled through financial dependency. The credit score system has created millions of voluntary doulos, people who shape their entire lives around maintaining their eligibility for debt. The most sophisticated aspect of the credit score system isn't what it measures, but how it manipulates behavior through seemingly rational rules that actually serve the financial industry's interests rather than consumers' well-being. Take credit utilization, the rule that you should never use more than 30% of your available credit limit. On the surface, this seems reasonable. It shows you're not overextended. But dig deeper and you'll discover something troubling. This rule is designed to keep you in debt permanently. Here's how it works. If you have a $10,000 credit limit, you're supposed to keep your balance below $3,000 to maintain a good score. But here's what they don't tell you. The optimal credit utilization for your score is actually between 1% and 10%. This means the algorithm rewards you for carrying a small balance indefinitely, rather than paying off your debt completely. Let's say you have a $1,000 balance on a card with an 18% interest rate. If you pay the minimum payment of $25 per month, You'll pay over $1,900 total and take nearly 7 years to pay it off. But if you pay it off immediately, your credit score might actually drop temporarily because you'll go from optimal utilization to no utilization, which the algorithm interprets as not actively using credit. This is deliberate. Credit card companies make most of their money from people who carry balances and pay interest. The credit score system reinforces this behavior by rewarding it. You're literally being trained to be a profitable customer. The credit mix requirement is even more insidious. FITO rewards you for having different types of credit: credit cards, auto loans, mortgages, personal loans. The algorithm assumes that someone who successfully manages multiple types of debt is more creditworthy than someone who manages their finances without debt. Think about how backwards this is. Someone who owns their car outright, rents an affordable apartment, and pays cash for everything has demonstrated the ultimate financial responsibility. They don't need to borrow money. But the credit score system penalizes this behavior. To get the best score, you need to prove you can handle multiple forms of debt simultaneously. This creates what economists call induced demand. Demand that exists only because the system requires it. People take out car loans they don't need, keep mortgages they could pay off, and maintain credit cards they never use, all to satisfy an algorithm that equates debt management with financial responsibility. The length of credit history factor is particularly manipulative. Your score improves the longer you've had credit accounts open, which sounds reasonable until you realize what it actually encourages. Young people are pressured to get credit cards as early as possible, not because they need credit, but because they need to start building their credit history. Banks market credit cards to college students as tools for building credit, when the real purpose is creating lifelong customers. An 18-year-old who gets a credit card and uses it responsibly according to credit score rules will spend decades making minimum payments and carrying small balances. Over their lifetime, they might pay tens of thousands of dollars in interest and fees for the privilege of having a good credit score. Even more troubling is how the system handles financial recovery. If you pay off a large debt, close unnecessary accounts, or eliminate your credit cards entirely, your score often drops. The algorithm interprets financial independence as a loss of creditworthiness. You're being punished for escaping the system. Consider someone who goes through a difficult period, accumulates debt, but then makes dramatic lifestyle changes to pay everything off and build an emergency fund. From any rational perspective, this person has become less risky, not more. They've demonstrated the ability to recover from financial difficulty and change their behavior. But the credit score system often penalizes this recovery because it reduces their value as an ongoing customer. The most revealing aspect of these rules is what they prioritize: consistency over improvement, debt management over debt elimination, and system participation over financial independence. These aren't measures of financial responsibility. They're measures of profitability to lenders. Dr. Frank Partnoy, a finance professor at UC San Diego, has studied credit scoring algorithms extensively. He discovered that the mathematical models are specifically calibrated not to identify the most creditworthy borrowers, but to identify the most profitable ones. The sweet spot for lenders is borrowers who will maintain debt indefinitely while making payments reliably. This explains why people with the highest credit scores often aren't the wealthiest or most financially stable. They're the people who have learned to play the credit game according to rules designed to benefit lenders. Meanwhile, truly wealthy individuals who don't need credit often have lower scores because they don't participate in the debt cycle that the algorithm rewards. The system even penalizes financial education. People who understand how credit cards work and pay them off immediately get lower scores than people who carry balances. People who negotiate better terms or pay loans off early can see their scores drop. The algorithm has been designed to reward financial behaviors that benefit lenders, not borrowers. What started as a tool for evaluating loan applications has metastasized into a social control system that would make authoritarian regimes envious. Today, your credit score influences decisions that have nothing to do with your ability to repay debt, creating a comprehensive surveillance and control mechanism disguised as financial assessment. Let's start with housing. Landlords now routinely check credit scores before approving rental applications, despite the fact that there's no correlation between credit history and being a good tenant. Someone who pays their rent reliably but missed credit card payments during a medical emergency gets rejected in favor of someone who games the credit system but might be a problematic renter. This creates a perverse situation where your past financial difficulties determine your future housing options, potentially trapping you in a cycle of housing instability that makes financial recovery even more difficult. Miss a few payments due to job loss, and you might find yourself unable to rent decent housing, forcing you into more expensive or unstable living situations that make financial recovery harder. Employment screening represents an even more troubling expansion of credit score control. Approximately 47% of employers now run credit checks on potential employees, and the practice is growing rapidly. The justification is that financial stress makes employees unreliable or susceptible to theft, but research shows no correlation between credit scores and job performance or workplace integrity. What this really creates is a system where past financial difficulties can permanently damage your earning potential. Lost a job and missed payments while unemployed? That lower credit score might prevent you from getting hired for your next position. It's a trap designed to keep people in financial distress permanently vulnerable. Insurance companies have discovered they can use credit scores to predict claims frequency, though not for the reasons they claim. People with lower credit scores do file more insurance claims, but this isn't because they're more reckless drivers or homeowners. It's because financial stress forces people to defer maintenance, drive older cars, and live in areas with higher crime rates. The credit score becomes a proxy for economic class, allowing insurance companies to legally charge higher rates to people who can least afford them. Even more insidious is how utility companies use credit scores. Getting electricity, gas, or water service often requires a credit check, with low-score customers forced to pay hefty deposits or denied service entirely. This means that past financial difficulties can literally leave you in the dark, unable to access basic services necessary for survival and recovery. Cell phone companies, internet providers, and streaming services all use credit scores to determine pricing and service availability. The result is that people with lower scores pay more for the same services, creating what economists call a poverty tax, where financial difficulty becomes progressively more expensive. But perhaps the most troubling expansion is into what researchers call lifestyle credit scoring. Dating apps are beginning to incorporate credit information. Some employers check credit scores before promoting existing employees. Social credit experiments are emerging where your score affects your access to premium services, favorable pricing, and even social opportunities. China's social credit system gets international attention and condemnation. But America has quietly built something potentially more insidious, a corporate social credit system that operates without government oversight and with minimal public awareness. Unlike China's system, which is explicitly governmental, America's system operates through private companies, making it harder to regulate or resist. The psychological impact of this expansion is profound. When people know that every aspect of their lives might be affected by their credit score, they begin to modify all their behavior around protecting that number. They avoid career risks that might temporarily affect their income. They avoid medical procedures they can't afford immediately. They stay in bad relationships to maintain dual incomes that support their credit profile. Dr. Michel Foucault predicted this phenomenon in his work on disciplinary power. He described how surveillance systems achieve control, not through direct coercion, but by making people modify their behavior based on the possibility of being watched and judged. The credit score system has achieved exactly this: comprehensive behavioral modification through the threat of financial exclusion. The most chilling aspect is how this system is expanding internationally. Countries that never had credit scoring systems are adopting American-style credit bureaus and scoring models, often as requirements for participating in global financial markets. The system that started as a tool for American banks is becoming a global mechanism for behavioral control. Young people growing up in this environment accept credit score monitoring as normal, just as previous generations accepted surveillance cameras and social media tracking. They don't remember a time when you could rent an apartment, get a job, or access services without submitting to financial surveillance. For them, the credit score isn't an imposition. It's just how the world works. But this normalization masks something unprecedented in human history. A comprehensive system where your access to housing, employment, transportation, and basic services depends on your value as a profit center for financial institutions. It's not quite slavery, and it's not quite freedom. It's something new, algorithmic serfdom, where the chain is a number and the master is an equation. We've reached a point where a mathematical formula created by a private corporation has more influence over your life choices than your own values, goals, or circumstances. The credit score system represents something unprecedented in human history: the privatization of social trust and its conversion into a profit-generating mechanism. Think about what we've uncovered. A system ostensibly designed to measure creditworthiness actually measures profitability to lenders. Rules that claim to promote financial responsibility actually encourage permanent debt. An algorithm that promises objectivity actually embeds the biases of an industry that profits from keeping people in financial bondage. But perhaps most disturbing is how this system has convinced us to participate willingly in our own surveillance and control. We check our credit scores obsessively, modify our behavior to improve them, and judge our own financial worth by numbers calculated using secret algorithms designed to benefit companies that see us as profit opportunities, not human beings. The philosophical implications are staggering. We've allowed our access to housing, employment, and basic services to be determined by an algorithm that reduces human complexity to a 3-digit number. We've created a society where past financial difficulties can become permanent barriers to recovery, where financial independence is punished, and where your value as a debt customer determines your access to opportunity. This isn't just about money, it's about human dignity. It's about whether we live in a society where people have the freedom to recover from mistakes, to choose financial independence over debt optimization, and to access opportunities based on their capabilities rather than their value as customers to financial institutions. But recognizing the system for what it is, control disguised as protection, is the first step toward regaining your freedom. Here's what you can do. First, optimize for wealth, not credit score. Pay off high-interest debt immediately, even if it temporarily hurts your score. Build an emergency fund instead of maintaining credit card balances. Choose financial independence over credit score optimization every single time. Second, minimize your dependence on credit whenever possible. Save for purchases instead of financing them. Choose used cars you can afford over new cars that require loans. Rent in areas where landlords don't require credit checks. Or find private landlords who will consider your actual qualifications rather than your score. Third, understand that your credit score measures your value to lenders, not your worth as a human being. A low score often indicates that you're not profitable enough to the financial system, which might actually be a sign that you're managing money wisely. Fourth, support businesses and organizations that don't use credit scores for non-lending decisions. When possible, choose employers, landlords, and service providers who evaluate you based on relevant qualifications rather than financial surveillance. Finally, educate others about what the credit score system really is. Most people have been so thoroughly conditioned to accept credit scoring as normal that they've never questioned its fundamental assumptions. Help them see that a system barely 30 years old isn't a natural law of economics. It's a choice we've made as a society, and choices can be changed. Other countries handle credit differently. In Germany, banks are required to consider your actual income and expenses rather than relying primarily on scoring algorithms. In Japan, credit bureaus are non-profit organizations rather than for-profit companies. In Denmark, comprehensive financial privacy laws limit how credit information can be used. The American system isn't inevitable. It's just profitable for the companies that created it. The credit score system works exactly as intended. It creates compliant, profitable customers who modify their behavior to benefit financial institutions rather than themselves. But once you see the system clearly, once you understand that the rules are designed to benefit lenders rather than borrowers, you can make different choices. You can choose freedom over score optimization. You can choose wealth building over debt management. You can choose to live according to your values rather than an algorithm's requirements. The question isn't whether you're smart enough to play the credit game well. The question is whether you're wise enough to recognize that the game itself is rigged and that the only winning move might be not to play. Your life is more than a number. Your worth isn't determined by an algorithm. Your future shouldn't be constrained by a system designed to keep you profitable to others rather than prosperous for yourself. What will you choose?